All right, everybody. Thank you, and welcome to this webinar about dealing with finances and divorce, financial considerations to create the brightest future. And I am really happy to welcome Lisa Decker. Lisa did a show with us on Divorce Dialogues, and it was such a great, interesting, and valuable show that I really wanted to have her come back and do this webinar on this topic. Lisa is a certified divorce financial analyst and a real estate collaboration specialist in divorce, and the CEO and founder of Divorce Money Matters and Divorce Town USA. She's also the author of the book, Divorce Your Spouse, Not Your Money, available on Amazon. And Lisa devotes herself to divorce financial planning services for her clients across the country with coaching, consulting, and full analysis options done on a flat fee basis. In her practice, she has seen it all, the good, the bad, the unfortunate, the ugly in divorce situations. Lisa finds smarter solutions for the family finances and the future. And I love, Lisa, this idea of divorcing your spouse and not your money. And I think that a lot of people are worried that that's in fact what divorce means. And so and I think that's why a lot of people are here on the call to learn how they might not have to divorce their money when they divorce their spouse. So how should people think about that, really, from divorce not meaning necessarily divorcing their money?
Well, of course, divorce comes down to really the money and the children. The legalities tie it all up together when you're done negotiating everything. And when we are looking at the marital assets, you're going to be hopefully getting to some type of equitable division. And most states, unless you're in a community property where it's 50-50, and many times equitable turns out to be about 50-50 anyway. So we're always looking to give a fair and equitable balance to both spouses. What we're talking about when we're saying divorce your spouse, not your money, is not spending excess money in fees and not dragging your case on and trying to get revenge at your spouse at the cost to yourself and to your family unit. So there are lots of smarter ways to go about this process that won't destroy your finances and your family for the future.
So I think what you mean is not spend money fighting unnecessarily.
Yes. Yes, correct.
Yeah. Right. So I think that's about process choice, right? So like who you hire, what you ask them to do, and how you work with them. And so just kind of in pre-divorce planning, right? And what I always say to my clients is that the most important decision that you make after the decision to divorce is the decision how to divorce, not necessarily who your lawyer is or any of those things, but the really big decision is how do you want to go about making the decisions that need to be made as part of the divorcing process. And so just something to be cognizant of, and it's not what this webinar is about, so I just want to get into the substance of it. So, one thing that we've been talking about is to create a solid financial plan right out of the box, right? And my experience of my clients is that the first year or two is really the hardest because it's the first time, it's when you're adjusting to the loss of the economies of scale of living together, and you're living on maybe reduced income or reduced assets. And so how should people think about that first year or two, and particularly for people whose portfolio is their income? Can be particularly
that makes it a little more tough when you're not working and what you're living off of savings or investments. So you definitely want to have pre-divorce planning so you can look at those items and see what's the best way to allocate things, to avoid taxes, to avoid credit issues, to ensure your income streams if possible, so that you can avoid many of those problems. Now, if you're still in your working years, it's vitally important that you also are looking at an accurate budget. I find that that's one of the hardest things for people to do, is really look look at how much am I spending and where am I spending it. It's one of those things that we all know we need to do, and few people like to do it. And in addition, where are your assets invested? You know, the same rules apply. It's just that when you're not working, you've got even a harder row. You've got to work with what you have. When you're still working, you can look at, can I increase hours? Can I shift jobs? Can I go back and get training and level up to something else? So the pre-divorce planning is so vitally important to make sure that you understand what you own, what you owe, what may be owed to you, and how best to split that pot for the benefit of both parties, and then move forward with a solid financial plan after your divorce financial planning, with a solid financial plan to maximize what you have and move forward in the future. So it's a matter of what you get from the divorce and in your assets and the liabilities that you may incur, and also in the matter of how much income are you going to be bringing in through child support, possibly alimony, maybe property settlement, whatever the case may be.
Because those could also be things you're spending, right? So if you're the payer, and for the purposes of this webinar, I think we have to consider the purpose, the perspective of the recipient and the payer. And, you know, it can feel like it stinks from both ends of that
Yes.
equation.
Yes, you're correct.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about budgets. So you said, you know, everybody should do it. Nobody likes to do it. And I personally find the word budget to be a lot like the word diet, meaning you should do something different than what you're doing. You should restrict yourself. You should be healthier. You should whatever those things are. But the idea isn't necessarily to restrict, right? I mean, I think from our previous conversations that it's really about taking a look at how you're allocating your resources and then choosing to allocate toward what's most important, right? So if vacation is the most important thing or really important, then you might choose to spend less on clothes or eat out less or live in less expensive housing so that you can afford a better vacation. So what do you think about that?
Well, I couldn't agree more. And, you know, part of that whole process is really digging into what is it that you desire in life and how can you make that happen. And for a lot of people, the budget is culture shock. They may have been living beyond their means to begin with and having financial troubles in the marriage, and now they're going to have to expand upon the bills that they have on their own. It's not like when you split your assets down the middle, you can't split your bills down the middle. You can't split a mortgage in half. Your utilities are going to double. So many of the expenses are going to stay the same or more because of the economies of scale that you mentioned. And so it is a big shift for people, but if they do set their priorities, as you mentioned, then they can allocate their resources towards the things that are most important to them and look at areas that they can cut. And also, you know, maybe taking on some side work. I know people who have become Uber drivers or, you know, tutoring kids or different things just so that they can have those things that are important to them.
Is that part of the financial plan? Because, you know, we're really looking at what can create a sustainable life plan. And you broke it down into this pre-divorce, which doesn't mean pre-deciding to divorce, although it's always good to look at these things all along in life, but really understanding what you have, what you owe, where's the money coming from, where's the money going to, as part of looking at the analysis of your life from a divorce perspective, and then connecting that to the future plan that goes all the way out for the rest of your life, right? And obviously you have to make adjustments along the way, but it's not like one and then it's a completely different thing.
No.
Right? So how does that work?
Well, you know, we're doing a lot of the front work in the pre-divorce stage. And, you know, a lot of people that don't work with a divorce financial planner don't go so in depth in it. They'll fill out a financial affidavit or whatever the document is called in their area, which may ask for assets and liabilities and income and expenses, but it really doesn't break it down in a way like doing an actual budget. You're just kind of doing line items. They don't have as many as perhaps my divorce software is what I see frequently, and they're just filling in the blanks to get it done as fast as possible. When you are working with a divorce financial planner, we're really trying to give you a very broad bird's eye view of this is what a snapshot is of your future life for both parties. And part of the purpose of that is to see if there is a need and an ability to pay for alimony purposes. So after we've calculated in the child support, is there any money left over to help the other spouse if they have a need? So it goes beyond just budgeting, but yes, you take the figures that you have here, and then when you build your post-divorce financial planning, you've already done the hard work of the budget in itself, and you have a really big idea of what that's going to look like. We determine what's that housing number going to look like. Where are you going to move afterwards? Are the costs higher in that particular area? Can you downsize somewhere else? So we're really looking at it at a much broader picture.
So this is really great, Lisa, because we're talking about creating a plan, and the plan is for what you expect to happen, right? And so, a lot of people come into my office and their heads are filled with what if this disaster happens, what if this other crisis happens, what if? And what I usually say to them is, why don't we start with what if all those things don't happen, right? So what if things go the way we expect them to go? And let's start with that plan, because that's kind of like the basement, right, of the structure, and then we can deal with all those what ifs.
Absolutely.
Right. And but we do have to deal with those what ifs, right? We do have to consider, once we have the what if an elephant doesn't fall through the ceiling, deal with the elephant falling through the ceiling, a donkey falling through the ceiling, a cat falling through the ceiling, like the stuff that life happens, right? So what are some of the things that you help people figure out what if this thing happens? What are some of those what ifs?
Well, since you mentioned the house and things falling through the roof, one of the things that I do as a real estate collaboration specialist in divorce is look at the house. If one spouse is buying the house from the other, many times people just take the house for face value and think, I've lived here, I know the house. I require a request, and strongly request, that they have a home inspection done, because there may be underlying issues they're not aware of. What if you have a mold issue you're not aware of just yet, or the air conditioner is old and about to go, or you do need a new roof shortly? Those kinds of things we can build into the divorce plan so that you are not buying it without full knowledge. It's just like if you were going to buy it from another buyer, you would want those things disclosed, you'd want to know about them, and you'd want to factor them into the price. So in a real estate situation, that's the kind of thing that we would be looking at. Some of the other what ifs, and by the way, we would also look at claims for things that were falling through the ceiling and other things like that, because if you have had a lot of claims on your property, it may be very hard to get insurance later on for yourself buying it from your spouse or for another buyer. And that can factor into the price and negotiations as well. We look at the clue report to see what your score is on that. Some of the other things would be, what if a disability happens? People do get sick. They have health issues, accidents happen. So, there are some policies that you can buy before the divorce is final. You want to put things in place and line these up if you can afford to insure. Now, disability policies can be quite costly, so not everyone can afford these, but if you can, an own-occ policy is best. That means that you are covered for your own occupation. Some disability policies will just cover for you to work any kind of job, and if you're a surgeon and you can no longer do surgery, you don't want to go and work at a store or something like that. So for a high wage earner, we would want to have have an own OC disability policy. And it's best to buy disability policies during the marriage because you get a discount when you buy as a couple. And if you divorce, you're able to split the policy into two and share in the discount that you originally received. So if we're looking at a case where a disability policy is possible, let's put it in place before the divorce is final. And also know that, as far as disability payments, some states do allow the disability that you're receiving from insurance to be put towards child support. Some do not. So that's a very state-specific thing that you would have to check with your financial planner in that state or your attorney. Now, the next thing that we could plan for and hope doesn't happen is the death of a spouse, an ex-spouse. And if you are receiving child support or alimony, it is very important that you have a policy put in place prior to the divorce to make sure that your spouse, soon to be ex, is insurable. Maybe they have some type of health issue. Maybe they have high blood pressure. Maybe they've received a cancer diagnosis and are no longer insurable. If that's the case, then you won't be able to get a policy on them, or it may be so expensive that you can't afford it. So how else can we cover those payments? Now, if they can afford it, if they are healthy, you want to get a term policy. Most likely they're very inexpensive, and you want to have your divorce financial planner figure out how much do we need to insure for? How much money would you have to have if your spouse passed away and you were still owed alimony and child support? And put that number together and get a policy to cover that length of time for that amount of money. But if they're not insurable, there are other ways to collateralize what you may be owed. Quadros can sometimes be used for this purpose, a qualified domestic relations order. Many of us think of them strictly for retirement plans and pension plans, but on occasion they are used to collateralize money that's owed. Your home, in some cases, can have a lien placed upon it that can be removed once the full debt is paid off. And I've also seen the first right upon death type clauses that, if you pass away and there's no money left to pay you, what the spouse that's receiving spouse, what they're owed, that they get the first right against the estate of their ex-spouse to gain what they were owed. And so the other thing I will say is to purchase and own any policy that you put upon your spouse so that you know that the beneficiary is not going to be changed and that the premiums are going to be paid. It's a small price to pay.
Okay, well, that was a whole lot. So let's see if we can go back and tease it out. First of all, could you explain the difference between a whole life insurance policy and a term policy? When you say a term insurance policy is cheap, what does that mean, and what's the difference, and the pros and cons of both kinds?
Well, there are multiple types of insurance policies, life insurance policies. We have whole life, we have term, we have variable life, we have universal life. There's a lot of different types of policies, and they can be used for different purposes. Many of them, universal and variable life, can be used for investments as well. And so they have a life component and an investment component. They're complicated products, and it's far beyond the scope of this webinar to explain them. And you want to work with somebody who understands life insurance policies and make sure you really understand the terms of them and what you're getting into, because there's a lot of tax implications if they're not done properly. And if you're not working with someone experienced, you can really lose a lot of money in them. Whole life policies, well, let me say this about Katherine. I'm not a big fan. I think of them as putting money in a hole in the ground. My mother-in-law, for instance, had a long-term term policy, a life policy on my father-in-law. And an agent came along 2 years before he passed and suggested that he get a whole life policy for the same amount of coverage. It was several $100,000 at the time. And it seemed to be, the way it was explained to them, that it would be a better benefit to them. And so they made the switch. And after he passed, and I was helping her with all the documentation and trying to help her get through all of the things you need to do to close out an estate, we realized that she had this whole life policy, and instead of it actually being worth several $100,000, it was barely worth a couple of $1,000s because it had not had time to build cash value and become fully funded. And so, hundreds of thousands of dollars were gone. And that was a really hard lesson to learn. So again, with insurance policies, know what you're getting into. Now, term is just like it sounds. You buy a policy for a specific term, let's say 10 years, and you pay the same monthly premium every month. They're fixed. And at the end of the term, you don't have any insurance anymore unless you pay the much higher premium that they jump to. But at that point in time, you don't need that policy anyway. Maybe you needed to cover for 10 years while the children were still young, and now they've grown. And so that need is no longer there. But the premiums are far less. With the whole life and the other policies that I talked about, the premiums are going to be much higher, but you're also building some cash value. So it's about cash value and it's about coverage. How much death benefit are you getting? And you have to understand the intricacies of each policy to determine what's right for you. In a case like divorce, I like to recommend term for the most part, unless we're dealing with high wage earners that have a need to, shelter some money or things like that.
So a term policy is really like car insurance, really insurance for your car. Like if you don't have an accident, you don't claim it, but you don't get any money back.
Right.
Whereas the whole life policy is kind of a combined savings vehicle and insurance policy, and so that it builds a cash value. So a term policy that has a death benefit of $1 million is worth nothing unless the insured dies.
Correct.
Whereas the whole life policy builds cash value. Yes. And has it in the savings component of it and has a value. And this is interesting just in terms of the divorce. Also, you have a term policy, there's nothing of value there, but unless somebody dies, the insured person dies, but the other whole policy has some cash value.
Correct. Yes, we always check the life insurance to see if there's cash value. And typically it's not divisible. One person can only hold the policy. So we offset the value of that cash somewhere else.
Another thing that you talked about was this quadro. So that's a very specific to the profession term. So, and I think what you were saying is that somehow maybe that some retirement benefits could be pledged instead of a life insurance policy if someone can't get one, or it's prohibitively expensive. Is that right?
Yes. It's not common, but I have seen it used occasionally when we don't have a backup with life insurance, and someone wants to make sure, if you pass away, I need to get what I'm depending on here to raise the kids or to take care of myself. And so a quadro can be used in some cases to collateralize other assets. Correct.
And could that also be true for if there was a disability that wasn't covered? Because if you think, all right, post-divorce, we're going to go along with the plan, we're both going to live to a ripe old age, we're going to raise our children together but apart, and one person is going to pay these expenses of the children and this amount of money to the other person, whatever. And then something happens and that plan can't go forward. So what could happen? A payer could die, the recipient could die, which obviously costs also if they're children, young children, and even not that young children who are unemancipated, meaning still dependent on their parents, there could be costs associated for the payer, because now that payer is also taking on the responsibility of the part of the person who was receiving support at the time. So it's not just a one-way street. This is a complete, like a 360-degree look at the thing.
Yes.
And so it's pretty easy to insure life, meaning with life insurance, unless somebody has one of those pre-existing conditions or another pre-existing condition that makes it impossible or impractical to get life insurance. But a disability, where you mentioned the surgeon, right? So the surgeon can't be a surgeon anymore, or a hedge fund person can't be a hedge fund person anymore. They can do something, but they can't do it at the level. And that kind of insurance can be super expensive too.
Yes.
And so, you know, that's obviously a disaster for the entire unit,
Yeah.
right? It would have been a disaster if that happened when the couple was married. And so are there some things that we can do with regard to retirement assets, like a different kind of distribution in the event of a disability, or just in terms of a death?
You know, I'm not sure on that, Catherine. I'd have to do some more research on that. I haven't had that come up, that question. That's a great question, though. I will tell you with the children, though, on a life policy that they cannot inherit those life benefits, the policy payout directly because they are minors. So it's best to have a trust set up in advance that can be funded with those policy proceeds, so that someone then can take care of the children and have the means. And I agree with you. You know, we're talking here about from the perspective of if you're expecting to receive funds, child support and alimony, how do you protect that? But if your other spouse, the parent that's taking care of the children the majority of the time, passes away, the other spouse, the ex that was paying, still going to incur costs because you need to have someone help you raise the children. So I like to put policies on both parents. It's just that we may not need as much coverage on the other side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so doing a pretty good audit of what you already have in place, where it is, whether or not there are trusts involved, and what you might need going forward in order to ensure against or prepare for the possibility of some of these what ifs, instead of just putting on your rose-colored glasses and hoping everything's going to be okay, really is what you're all about, sounds like.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you as a widow, you know, I never expected that one day coming home from the store, my husband would have a heart attack behind the wheel while driving us home. We don't prepare for those things in life. But luckily, because of the work that I do, I had prepared an estate plan and life insurance, and it made all the difference in the world, because when your heart is ripped out and you're grieving, and that happens along with divorce, right? It's similar, a grieving process to death. It's a death of a marriage. It helps so much to know that you have some resources that you can fall back on to take the time to process, to grieve, to get your family taken care of, to go through what you need to, rather than, oh my God, where are we going to get the money to live and exist, and trying to figure it out among all the immense emotion that's going on. So I'm a big proponent of life insurance and disability if you can handle it, if you have the means for it at any time in life.
So speaking of life planning, Social Security benefits are something that we cannot change in a divorce agreement. These are federal entitlement, and there's nothing we can do to change them as part of the divorce in any state. I think that the understanding of how Social Security works post-divorce.
Catherine, I've lost your voice. I can't hear you, and you're kind of freezing up a little bit too.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yay, we're back. Perfect. Life in the world of Zoom. Okay.
Social Security benefits is what I was talking about, and I think they're very poorly understood, and especially poorly understood after divorce. But before we go on to that, we have a question from one of the attendees, which is that at what age can a child receive life insurance directly?
I believe that's 18, age of majority. Mm-hmm.
I think
and I wouldn't suggest that you give them all those proceeds. I highly would recommend that you have a trustee who can help them make decisions that are wise. Otherwise, that we call it in the industry the Harley-Davidson Rule, where, you know, they'll buy themselves a big Harley-Davidson and hit the road and have a great party, and probably blow through the money because the maturity level is just not there for most kids at 18 to handle that.
I was just going to say that. I've got 5 kids, and I'm not sure I would want any of them at 18 to come into a bunch of money. So,
yeah.
Or myself. All right, so Social Security. And listen, I just want to say to the other attendees, please feel free to send us a question in the Q&A. It's easier for me to watch than the chat, but if you have questions, let us know what they are. It's much easier to answer them if we know what they are. So Lisa, on to Social Security. How does that work after divorce?
Okay, so the first thing I want to say about it is, if you know you're getting a divorce, please make sure that you save your spouse's Social Security number, or at least a tax return, something that you will be able to go back to the Social Security Administration and say, here's who I was married to, and here's their Social Security number. Otherwise, it's a very difficult process. You have to know their birth date, their parents, where they were born. You have to have a lot more details, and you may not remember that 10 or 15 years later. So keep that information, and it may make life a lot easier for you if and when you're ready to retire and go for Social Security benefits. Now, here's the thing. If your ex is still living when you're ready to retire, your marriage has to have lasted longer than 10 years for you to be able to collect on their record. And by the way, you get a choice. You can collect on your full record, your benefit that you are owed from Social Security, or half of your spouse's, 50% of theirs. Now, they don't take away 50% from your spouse. They're not going to lose that, but that's what your benefit could be based on. So you're going to want to find out from their administration at that time, here's my benefit. What is my ex-spouse's benefit worth? And then if theirs is worth more, then you apply to go on their benefit. You still have to be unmarried as well. If you are remarried at the time that you start benefits, then it's going to be with your new spouse, or your current spouse. If you also have to be age 62 or older, and your benefit, again, has to be less than your husband's, or it doesn't make sense to your ex-husband's, or it doesn't make sense. Your ex has to be entitled to Social Security or disability benefits. So if they did not work enough credit hours or didn't pay in the Social Security system, then this doesn't apply, or this conversation doesn't apply to you. If your ex at that time has not applied for benefits but can qualify for them and is 62 or older, then you can receive their benefits on his or her work record if you've been divorced for at least 2 years. Now, that's the current state. I want to say, just, with the government, they can change the rules any way they want along the way. Some people get grandfathered in, some don't, but that's the current way that things stand. And there is this interesting booklet, and I also want to preface this by saying, Katherine, that, I see a lot of high wage earners that are the women in the family. And so this can apply either way. It doesn't mean that men can't go and try to get Social Security on their ex-wives' benefits earnings, because it applies both ways. But this booklet that the government puts out, called What Every Woman Should Know, and they really need to change the name of that, What Every Ex Should Know. But it does go into more than just divorce. But there is information in this booklet that I have just quoted to you, and you can request this from the Social Security Administration. That'll give you more details. I will tell you that dealing with the Social Security Administration, like any governmental entity, is one of the most frustrating things out there. I have many times when I have to help a client determine things like this, I will make 2, sometimes 3 phone calls to verify the information, because I have been given misinformation. I always document the date, the time, and the representative that I spoke with. I get their name and their ID number, or whatever clarifying number they give you. What is your, they don't want to a lot of times give you their last name, but what office do you work out of? What is your account title, or something like that? And I document that because I've been given misinformation. It just didn't feel right. I called back to ask another question and spoke with another agent who told me, oh no, you were given misinformation. And then something felt off about that. And I called back a third time and asked for a supervisor and got the real information. So be careful, even with that, who you're talking to when it comes to the government or insurance companies or any of that. If it's not sitting right with you, hang up and call again and make sure that you're feeling good with that information. By the way, if a spouse is getting, you or your spouse, ex-spouse, get SSDI, your child may be eligible for Social Security dependence benefits based on your earnings records. And you should make sure that either you or the other parent apply for benefits for your child as soon as you are approved for that. In some states, dependent child benefits are credited towards any child support obligation, so that can help. One of the things that we didn't talk about, and I don't know if you want me to cover anything else here before I mention about modifications. Did you have any further questions on this part there, Katherine?
Well, I have a couple of questions. One is, if people are looking at investment returns as part of the money that's going to be sustaining them going forward, it's hard to, most investment returns don't come in the way we think of interest coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you propose that people think about that and using some of their investments to help support them, other than just by putting them in the checking account and spending them down?
I suggest you work with a very qualified, certified financial planner, someone who can give you projections with various rates of return, because obviously the more risk you take, the higher the rate of return, but also the greater risk that you will lose money. And so you have to invest at a level that you feel comfortable with and also appropriate for your age. The older we get, the less risk we can take in a greater proportion. We still need to take some risk to be able to live off of those funds, but we want to reduce the amount of volatility that we are exposing ourselves to. So that's a really difficult question to answer in a nutshell, because every one of us is at a different stage in life. And for divorce financial planning purposes, when I do forecasting, generally for older clients, because they are closer to retirement, we use very conservative, maybe 3 or 4%, because you probably can get that in the market even in difficult times. Now there have been years that we've had negative returns in the stock market, so we don't always hit the mark. But if you're using conservative returns, then you're going to be surprised by better results, right? So don't, go out there and say, oh, I'm going to make 30% interest every year, because it's not likely.
Yeah, great. I think that's really good advice. And also, it's a similar question, but what about college savings? People get divorced and their kids are 5 and 7, let's say, and they're struggling to figure it out in the beginning. You were talking about getting an Uber driving side gig, or, anything to kind of keep everything as even and continuous and status quo in terms of lifestyle as possible. And then at some point, the kids are going to go to college, and it can be really shocking, I think, to not be like, oh my God, Timmy's going to college in the fall. We're just trying to apply for colleges, and now it's really it's a big ticket item.
It is. Now, not every state mandates that parents pay for college. So like in Georgia here where I am, we only do child support and, all of the child's needs through the age of majority. Once you become 18 or you finish high school, that's it. The parents are no longer responsible. Now, you and I know, you have 5 kids, I have 2 and 2 grandchildren. We know that children don't just hit 18 and have no more needs, but we're kind of on our own to take care of them in this state. Now, I do have parents who have greater means, who have decided to do their own funding, and they do put that in their settlement agreement. And there's some cautions about that. I've seen attorneys say, no, because if you can't fulfill that, you're buying an obligation that you may not be able to fulfill, and you're going to be in contempt, and you're going to be back in court fighting over this. So sometimes the parents just do it among themselves. I will tell you that I work with a college financial planner in the process of doing divorce, and I have seen when he has worked on plans with me that many times college financial aid, in fact, most times college financial aid is based on the parent who has primary custody. And so typically that will be the wife, who is the lower wage earner. In most cases, that's what we see. And so that's a benefit to the child. This is one time when divorce will actually benefit your children, is when it comes to college aid. It will be based on the lower wage earner's income, as long as the children are, he or she is the primary parent, primary custody. And that can be a great benefit for grants and other financial aid. So look at that possibility as well. Now, as far as, putting money away for the kids, try to build that into your budget. And, even if it's $50 or $100 a month, especially if they're young, that money's going to add up. But remember also that money, depending on the vehicle that you put it in, if they don't go to college, an UTMA, for instance, that kind of account has to be turned over to them when they turn 18. So it's really best to work with a certified financial planner, a CFP, or someone like that who has the experience to look at all these various aspects and put them into a comprehensive plan for you.
All right, great. Let's talk about modification. What was coming up for you?
Well, in our state, if things change after the divorce, you have a job loss, you have a disability happen, you get a better job, you're up leveling your life. One or the other spouse can apply for a modification through the court. You always want to do this through the court. Parents can talk to each other and make their own agreements, but if it's not sanctioned by the court, it's really not enforceable. So anytime you're going for a modification, you want to have the judge sign off on that, at least here in Georgia. And, we can do that typically if it's more than a 15% drop or increase. You find out your ex-spouse just got a huge raise or got a new job that's, giving them a lot more money. You can apply for a modification and petition for more alimony potentially, and more child support more likely. And that also, is done approximately every 2 years. You can apply for that. Now, it's not cheap to do modifications, so we try to assess things as best we can, especially when it comes to child support. Some things we won't put into the calculator. We'll actually put them aside, like things like extracurriculars, right? People always say, well, Johnny likes to play baseball this year, but, I might not want to do that in a couple of years. You may want to do marching band or something other kind of sport. So we try to define it loosely and, say that, let's say, for instance, that each parent will pay their proportionate share. If there's a 60-40 in their incomes, the higher wage earner will pay 60% or 50% if they're, more equity, more equal in their pay scale. And, it won't matter what the sport or the extracurricular is. And that way it's not locked into the child support calculator, and therefore you don't have to go for a modification. So we kind of try to have a little bit of give there so that parents don't get stuck in that trap. But more likely people go for modifications because of a job loss, a disability, an accident, an illness, something like that.
Yeah, so if the recipient of alimony becomes ill, and the expectation, is that it's going to, the support will be reduced, because that person will be getting a job or the children will be leaving, can something be modified to continue it for longer, if in the event of an illness, or to even increase it possibly if the person is needing additional support?
That's a good question. I have not come across that circumstance. Have you in your legal practice?
Not really. That is a risk, because I think that states don't want people to go on public assistance if they can possibly avoid it. So there is, I guess, a risk of that, but I think it's pretty unusual that.
Right. I think those kind of circumstances are, just going to have to be taken as they come, and find a legal counsel who can guide someone on that, who's had maybe some case law like that, or there may be some case law, but that is a little more unusual. I'm not sure about that myself.
Yeah. And I think we have a question from a participant. It's a lengthy question, and I think that might be part of the answer, but also when a house has been agreed to, that a house will be sold at a particular time and something happens or there's an illness and the plan has to be changed, you know, the possibility of changing the date for sale, is that something that could happen?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I have seen things like that. I was brought in on a case where I was not involved from the beginning, but an attorney called me to come in and help with a situation. Didn't involve illness, but it did involve the terms of the sale and one spouse wanting to buy out the other and having to perform certain things in order to keep the house. But the other spouse wanted the house sold. And the way that the document was written was set the couple up for failure, really. It was very confusing. It had a lot of ambiguity to it. And they brought me in to kind of assess, you know, what was the best way to go forward to help our client. And that was what I did. But had it been written a little tighter language with some escape clauses or what ifs, you know, many times when I'm dealing with something like that, you know, for instance, if the spouses can't agree on a realtor, for a mediator to pick a third mediator, a third realtor for them, because, you know, we can spend all our time just trying to find the right realtor. So we bring in a third party to bring that realtor in. If they can't agree on a price, they may each get an independent appraisal and then get a third and combine the value. So when we see that there may be some acrimony and some of these things are going to come up, we'll build as much language into things as we can. And you know, if the spouse is not able to qualify to purchase the house, that was a big problem in this other case. That should have been determined up front. One of the things when we talk about these what ifs is, you know, if you are purchasing the house from your spouse, have you been pre-qualified? Because many times I see people come to me with a settlement agreement who I did not work with previously, and they say, okay, I was ordered to refinance within 18 months, but I can't qualify because I need to show in writing that I'm receiving alimony and or child support for 36 months minimum. And so this set me up for failure to begin with. And now they have to go back to court and try to work out a modification through the court system. And it's very costly. The case that I was speaking about earlier, the woman spent more in the post-divorce fighting this than she did for her initial divorce. So, you know, these kinds of things need to be worked out ahead of time. I hope I answered that question for the person.
It was a very long question, so I think that was quite helpful. I am really interested, Lisa, about the house, the whole house thing, because I think a lot of people who are getting divorced have a house as a major asset, if not the major asset of the marriage.
Absolutely.
And it can be very painful because a house is more than just an asset, it's a home, and it represents a lot, including stability for the person who might be staying there, for the kids and all of that stuff. And so, you know, and it can be expensive to stay there, especially if there's a lot of equity caught up in that. And what is your view about the value of staying in the house or selling it and freeing up the equity or something in between?
Well, all of that, again, Katherine, we determine up front, because you can have a lot of cash in equity in your home, but it won't buy you groceries. So if you don't have cash flow from somewhere else or resources to tap into if you need them, then that house may have to be sold at a fire sale. And we certainly don't want to see that. And by the way, you know, if your spouse is still on the mortgage and you have not been able to refinance and you can't make the payment, then your spouse's credit is going to, your ex-spouse's credit is going to tank as well. And you're both going to take a nosedive. We don't want to see that happen to people. So we determine all of these scenarios up front. And it's sometimes a very hard conversation to have with people. You know, I want to stay in the house until my kids grow up. This is the only home they've known. This is, where they feel safe. And we understand that. But it certainly doesn't make a child feel safe when the bank is knocking on the door telling them that their belongings are going to be put on the front lawn if they don't make that payment right now. And that's a really hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. Most people, once they see the numbers in black and white and understand the ramifications, will take the advice and say, okay, it's time to sell. Let me free up some cash. Let me get into something more affordable and start over from there. But some people are just locked into that emotional decision. And, many times they've come back to talk to me a couple of years later and said, I regret that. I really, I was so wrapped up emotionally that I didn't make a wise decision and I lost the house. And that's just gut wrenching for everyone.
So we have another question, Lisa. And the question is, I want to stay in my premarital home, 25 years owned, 15 years married, title in my name. Does my spouse have a claim to 1/2 of the pay down of the mortgage equity or an increase in the market value of the house? My wife did not earn an income during the marriage and there was no capital improvements made. Anyway, that's the question.
Okay, there's a lot of specifics there that
Right.
I know very
quickly.
quickly.
The question asker has owned the home for 10 years longer than the marriage, and the title is in his name.
Okay.
And he's wondering whether or not the wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, I guess, has any claim to anything in the house, including an increase in value. That seems to be because of market forces.
Sure.
And also the increase in equity because the mortgage principal has been paid down.
Yes, I understand now. And thank you for reiterating that. Well, this is a very loaded question because the state laws differ from state to state. And I'm not sure where the caller is the listener is calling from, watching in from. In Georgia, I can speak to that. We have some very gray areas around this. We have different case laws, and depending on which side of the table I'm sitting with, as far as a client, is which case law we're going to go after and try to use in improving our point. Here we can separate the separate equity, the equity that you had prior to marriage, from what may be the marital equity, the change in value during the marriage, any equity that was paid down through marital funds. If this gentleman was putting a paycheck, for instance, into a joint account and then paying the mortgage from that was marital money. And so that piece we would have to filter out, and it can get quite complicated, but we can do calculations that can factor in those things. If your wife did any sweat equity into the property, that may be another part of the equation. So I don't know, how does that work in your state, Katherine?
Well, first I want to be very clear that this is not legal advice. This is just, right, if you should hire a lawyer or ask your own lawyer whether or not how this impacts you. But a couple of things. One is you have to understand that the idea of marital is different in the context of a divorce than it is in the context of earning your money and earning your paycheck. So to the extent, and assuming no prenup or postnuptial or other kind of agreement that says something different in New York, and this listener is from New York, the money that each person earns, even if you're the only earner, is marital money. So when you use that marital money to pay down the mortgage principal, that is creating basically marital savings that's in your home. So it's possible that your wife may be entitled to some of that mortgage principal pay down during the marriage back out. It doesn't mean half, it doesn't mean anything like that, but that's something that to look out for. Again, not legal advice about your situation, just general information. In terms of the appreciation of the house, as a general rule, if I owned this pair of glasses when I got married, it's titled to me, and I haven't changed title, and it was worth $1 when we got married, and it's worth $5 when I'm getting divorced, as long as I haven't done anything really to it, it's gone up in value because of market forces. And this is what we call passive appreciation, meaning I didn't do anything to make it go up in value, it just did. Then all of that appreciation technique should be, now, courts don't always understand this that well, and there are different theories about it, but theoretically, all of the appreciation of these glasses should be 100% mine, and I shouldn't have to buy my spouse out from any of that appreciation. But in this case, if I owed money on the glasses and I paid down the debt on the glasses with my marital earnings, then there's a piece of my marital earnings in the equity of the glasses, and there might be some argument that some of that passive appreciation should be marital as well. So it's a very complicated question, and is something that really should be looked at in your particular situation. So
very similar situation what we're talking about in both states. Yeah. And the benefit of having lived in the house doesn't really change the analysis from a equitable distribution, which is what we call the distribution of assets when you're getting divorced in New York. That is a difficult situation. So we're running out of time, Lisa, so I just wanted to say that I really appreciate your comments. I think that your expertise when it comes to the real estate element of the divorce, on top of the CDF, the financial planning and the divorce financial planning and Social Security and all that, is really, really interesting. And I personally never thought about getting a home inspection before one of my clients bought out the interest of the other person, because that happens a lot, as we were talking about, where someone wants to stay and is really trying to do their darndest to figure out a way to buy out the interest of the other person. But also thinking it's going to be a major commitment to do that, and not always so easy to do. So yes, for all of the participants, we will be sending the recording for the webinar out to you. It'll probably take us a day or two to get that done. But if you have any questions, please, Lisa, do you want to give your contact information in case someone wants to get in touch with you? Sure, thank you. I can be found at divorcemoneymatters.com. That's Money Matters with an S, and divorcetownusa.com. Best way is to reach out through the website, and we'll be happy to see how we can help you. I also offer a free complimentary consult, and there are several free gifts at both websites that you can avail yourself to that have a lot more information on what we talked about.
That's
Thank you for having me, Katherine.
It's my pleasure, and we will send out Lisa's contact information with the recording as well. Thanks everybody for participating.
Thank you so much.